Well, hello. Just doing a quick video on changing tires on a motorcycle. This is a 1998 Harley Road King, and I'm going to show you how I did it. This is done already, so I'm actually showing this at the front of the video, but I've actually already done the bike. I've recorded the steps that I did it. I use a no-mar tire changer that I bought a couple of years ago and I absolutely love. However, cruisers and touring bikes are very difficult tires to work on, taking off and on the rim, primarily because they have tall, stiff sidewalls. It's very challenging, even for an electric machine. A no-mar machine uses your own sweat and tears, but which makes it extra difficult. But I got through it, a little patience and a little perseverance, and I got the tires on and balanced. So here we go. For interest's sake, I've also recorded at the very end, show you a video on how easy it is to do a sport bike or a sport touring bike with short, softer sidewalls.
Here you can see me removing the side bags off the bike. Reducing the weight of the bike makes the job easier. As you can see, Harley still is one of the few manufacturers that has top-loading bags, which I find very convenient when you have your bags full of junk. I like to start at the front end of the bike. Without lifting the bike up, I remove the front calipers. They're held on with hex bolts, and usually if the bike's been well taken care of, they usually come off pretty easily. Using zip ties, I hold the calipers on the crash bars up out of the way. The calipers have to come off with most bikes, so there's clearance to get the wheel off around the brake discs. Starting on the left-hand side, I loosen the main axle nut. And over on the other side, I loosen up the two bolts on the axle cap. You'll see the hand jack underneath the belly of the bike. Once these two bolts are loosened, I'll jack the bike up using the side stand as a support. Once the bike is up in the air and the wheel is out, I'll put a block of wood under to support that in case the jack itself fails. This has served me for years. I've never had a bike go over. And now that the front end's in the air, gently tap out the axle. Here's a trick I've used for years and I recommend it to everybody. When you get that front end in the air, to relieve pressure on the axle and pull it out easily, use your foot as a wedge and your hand to hold the wheel and slide your foot underneath to support it. It pulls right out and makes the whole job a lot easier. There are a ton of videos on the Nomar website. The owner himself, Steve Nemish, or Nemish, however you pronounce it, has done a ton of changes on video, and he'll give you the specific steps. As you can see, I'm getting ready to break the bead, and that involves, of course, firstly, removing the valve stem to let the air out of the tire. So I have a tool that came with the kit, and out comes the valve stem. And as you can see, I've moved the pad underneath the rim, underneath the bead, get ready to break that. These hard, tall, stiff sidewalls are really difficult to pop off the rim, so I'm really coming down on this to break it. Not a tremendous amount of force, but much more than what you'd use on a sport bike. And thankfully, the Nomar breakers has these plastic pads on it, so it won't damage the wheel itself. And typically, you break the bead in 3 to 4 places, and it pops the whole thing off that side. Another challenge of the stiff sidewalls is actually getting the wheel clamped into the machine. You really have to pull the tire away from the rim to have it seat down in those hooks. Now, in the interest of disclosure, I should tell you that Nomar is very open and upfront about the fact that you'll have a tougher time getting a wheel off, or a tire off rather, a touring bike or a stiff sidewall cruiser tire like this one, for the reasons I've already mentioned. They suggest if you're doing a lot of these types of tires that you buy a spoon bar kit along with the different set of grippers for the machine underneath. I have neither. I'm still using the sport bike and the sport touring bike setup. So I would experience more challenges than someone who bought the a touring tire type setup. But you know what? I've done enough tires. I'm going to live with it. And now doing the bottom bead up and around and over, and off she comes. I clean the wheel with rubbing alcohol. That tends to get off any lube, any grease, any oil, and of course dirt. Unlike sport bike tires, these lower bead does not slide on over the rim, so it has to be put on just like the upper bead. Using the what they refer to as the yellow thing, I spin that lower bead on, and down and on she goes. Little wrestle, but I won in the end. And the upper bead was equally challenging, but eventually she went. One tip that Nomar gives you, which I did, was to let the tire sit in the sun to heat it up and soften it up. It tends to go on a little easier. And of course, the bead has to be seated. Now, these tires were especially difficult. I actually had to inflate them to close to 60 pounds to get both side beads to seat up on the rim. But they eventually came. I use Nomar's classic tire balancer. This balancer has done a fantastic job. I think I've balanced close to 60 tires on it, and it is excellent. Well worth the money. I allow the wheel to settle into its heavy part at the bottom, and then I obviously clean the area where the weight will go, which is on the light part at the top. Little trial and error. I start with 3/4 ounce weights. I stick them up at the top part, and I settle in to see how that holds, and hold it out on the edge at a radius and see if it goes up or down. If it goes up, it's still light. If it goes down, it's too heavy. I add 3 to one side, I'll add another 3 to the other side, and see how that works. Cleaning the area first to allow the weight to stick. Moving 3 more. Snap off. Peel off the weight. and stick it on to see how that sits. Pinch to hold and see how that, and just as luck would have it, that's pretty much bang on. There you go, balanced. Now, placing the two wheel spacers, one on each side, I get ready to reverse my foot trick. Place the wheel spacers in, slide my foot underneath to act as a wedge again, and slowly weasel it in while with holding the wheel with one hand and placing the axle through with the other. Usually, just a gentle tapping with your hands, all you need to get that axle all the way in. And you watch it on the other side to see the head pop through. On goes the wheel nut. And then I tend to tighten up the two clamp bolts. You give me a little friction so I can tighten the wheel nut without having to use any kind of tools to hold the other end of the axle. Not too tight, just tight enough to offer some friction so that I can spin the axle bolt on the other side. Once I have that tight, I tighten up the two nuts on the other side, two bolts on the other side. Now to simplify matters, I lower the bike down to allow its weight to fall back on that front tire, and I get ready to put on the calipers. Now, tightening up the caliper bolts is, I do it relatively tight now, but I'll review all the torque specs in my manuals and go back and check all the torque specs on all these bolts to make sure they're correct with the torque wrench. Rear tire is a little more difficult. It can't be changed, or at least not safely, on the side stand. So I use this bike lift that I think I spent $400 for 10 years ago, and it's paid for itself several times over. This particular stand allows you to pull a plate out from underneath the rear wheel once the bike is supported to allow the rear wheel to slide down and away from the stand. First things first, I remove the exhaust on the right hand side of the bike because the axle bolt needs to come out this way, and you'll find it will run into most exhaust, even this aftermarket exhaust. With the exhaust off, I pull the cotter pin on the left-hand side of the axle. And a bike that's been taken care of should not have on any seized axle nuts, and this one is not. Comes off fairly easily. I use a drift to punch out the axle just enough to get it into the adjuster. And until I support the rear wheel, I don't knock out any farther than this. Once the axle's out, I can wiggle the wheel forward and pull off the belt. And once the belt's off, supporting the wheel from underneath using my hand, I pull out the plate and then drop the wheel down underneath the stand. Getting ready to change the tire. And here we go, another tough bead to pop. You can see the kind of pressure I need to put on the side of this sidewall to get it to crack. And there goes first one. The rear tire is even stiffer than the front, and this one too is very difficult to spin off. But as you can see, a little patience and perseverance, it'll come. And here comes the other side. Like I say, a sport bike tire would spin right off. And of course, part of this process is making sure that wheel is lubed to allow the tire to slip and slide around in order to get up on that rim. I didn't waste my time trying to push the bead on. I started on the lower bead, working my way around to mount it on the wheel. And here's the upper one. This one was very challenging. Now once that tire was mounted and seated, I'm just showing you here how easy a sport bike tire went on, just to compare. This was done the next day. Anyway, for interest's sake, much easier. Anyway, until next time.